The morning sun was just starting to peek over the hills when Thomas Mitchell opened his eyes to complete darkness. It had been this way for 12 long years now, ever since that terrible day when everything changed. He was 58 years old, and for the past dozen years he had lived in a world without sight. But Thomas had learned something important during those years. Sometimes losing one thing helps you find something even better. Thomas reached out his hand and felt the familiar rough wooden surface of his nightstand. His fingers moved carefully until they found what he was looking for. His old leather boots, worn soft from years of walking the same paths. As he sat up on the edge of his bed, he could already hear the sound that made every morning worth waking up for. It was the gentle nickering of his horse Thunder calling to him from the barn. "Good morning to you too, boy," Thomas said with a smile, his voice carrying through the quiet Kentucky air. Even though he couldn't see Thunder, he knew exactly what the big horse was doing. Thunder would be standing at the gate of his stall, his massive head turned toward the house, waiting patiently for his human friend to start another day together. Thomas made his way through his small farmhouse with practiced ease. Every piece of furniture, every doorway, every step was memorized in his mind like a detailed map. He had lived in this house for over 30 years. First with his wife Mary before she passed away 8 years ago, and now alone, except for Thunder and the other animals on his 40-acre farm. The accident that took his sight happened on a day that started just like any other. Thomas had been working on his tractor, trying to fix a stubborn engine problem. Something went wrong with the hydraulic system, and a spray of hot fluid hit him directly in the face. The doctors at the hospital tried everything they could, but the damage was too severe. Thomas Mitchell, who had spent his whole life looking at rolling green fields and beautiful sunsets, would never see again. For the first few months after the accident, Thomas felt like his life was over. He couldn't work his farm the way he used to. Simple tasks that once took minutes now took hours. He bumped into things, got lost on his own property, and felt helpless in ways he had never experienced before. Many of his neighbors suggested he sell the farm and move to town, maybe into one of those assisted living places where someone could take care of him. But Thomas wasn't ready to give up. His farm had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had cleared the land with his own hands. His father had built the barn that still stood strong after all these years. This wasn't just a piece of property. It was his heritage, his home, and his purpose. That's when Thunder came into his life, though not in the way most people might expect. Thunder wasn't bought from some fancy horse breeder or trained by expensive specialists. He was actually born right there on the farm, the son of an old mare named Buttercup that Thomas had owned for years. When Thunder was born, he was just another farm animal, expected to help with the heavy work like pulling equipment and hauling loads. But Thunder was different from other horses from the very beginning. Even as a young colt, he seemed to understand that something was wrong with Thomas. While other horses might run away when someone stumbled or moved awkwardly, Thunder would stand perfectly still. If Thomas was walking near the pasture and started to veer toward a fence post or a hole in the ground, Thunder would make a soft sound, almost like he was trying to warn him. The first time Thomas really understood how special Thunder was happened about 6 months after the accident. Thomas was trying to walk to the mailbox at the end of his long driveway, using a walking stick to feel his way along. About halfway there, he lost his direction and started walking toward the road instead of along it. He could hear a car coming, but couldn't tell exactly where he was or which way to move to get out of danger. Suddenly, Thomas felt something large and warm pressing against his back, gently but firmly pushing him away from the road. It was Thunder. The horse had somehow gotten out of his pasture and had followed Thomas down the driveway. Thunder guided Thomas back to safety, then stood beside him until the car passed. From that day forward, Thomas knew he had found something incredible. Not just a horse, but a true partner. Over the months and years that followed, Thunder seemed to learn Thomas's needs almost like magic. The big Belgian horse, with his thick brown coat and gentle eyes, became Thomas's guide, his protector, and his best friend all rolled into one. Thunder learned to walk at exactly the right pace for Thomas, never too fast, never too slow. He learned to stop when there was an obstacle ahead, to turn left or right based on gentle pressure from Thomas's hand on his neck. But Thunder's intelligence went far beyond simple guidance. The horse learned Thomas's daily routine and would actually remind him of things he needed to do. If Thomas forgot to check on the cattle in the back pasture, Thunder would walk to that section of fence and whinny until Thomas followed. If a storm was coming, Thunder would become restless and pace near the barn, alerting Thomas to bring the other animals to shelter. The most amazing thing about Thunder was how he seemed to read Thomas's emotions. On days when Thomas felt sad or lonely, Thunder would stay close to the house, often resting his massive head on Thomas's shoulder in what felt like a hug. When Thomas was having a good day and felt energetic, Thunder would be more playful, sometimes even gently nudging Thomas as if inviting him to come out and explore the farm. Their daily routine became like a carefully choreographed dance. Every morning, Thomas would walk to the barn where Thunder would be waiting. Thomas would run his hands over Thunder's coat, checking for any cuts or problems, while Thunder stood perfectly still. Then Thomas would put on Thunder's halter and they would begin their rounds of the farm. Thunder knew every inch of the property as well as Thomas once had. The horse would guide Thomas along the fence lines, stopping at places where repairs were needed. He would lead Thomas to the water troughs to check if they needed filling. When it was time to move the cattle from one pasture to another, Thunder would position himself perfectly so Thomas could open gates and direct the other animals. People who visited the farm were always amazed by what they saw. Here was a blind man running a successful farm with the help of a horse that seemed to understand exactly what needed to be done. Thomas's neighbors often said it looked like Thunder, and Thomas could read each other's minds. But for Thomas, Thunder represented something even more important than just help with farm work. The horse had given him back his independence and his dignity. More than that, Thunder had shown Thomas that even in darkness, life could still be rich and meaningful. Every day brought new small moments of connection between man and horse that reminded Thomas he wasn't alone. As Thomas often told visitors, "I may have lost my sight, but Thunder helped me see what really matters in life." The bond between them was so strong that Thomas couldn't imagine his life without his four-legged guardian angel. Little did Thomas know that soon, this incredible bond would be tested in ways he never could have imagined. And Thunder's loyalty and intelligence would be pushed to their absolute limits. 3 miles down the road from Thomas's peaceful farm, trouble was brewing in the most unlikely place. Jake Morrison sat in his rundown trailer, staring at a stack of unpaid bills that seemed to grow bigger every day. At 34 years old, Jake had just gotten out of prison after serving 2 years for breaking into houses around the county. Now he was back in his hometown, but everything felt different. Nobody wanted to hire him, his old friends avoided him, and his money was running out fast. Jake had always been the kind of person who looked for easy solutions to hard problems. Even as a kid, he would rather steal candy from the store than earn money to buy it. Now, sitting in his cramped trailer with the electricity about to be turned off, Jake was getting desperate. He needed money, and he needed it soon. That's when he remembered seeing the old blind farmer at the grocery store a few weeks back. Thomas Mitchell had been standing in line, carefully counting out cash from a thick wallet to pay for his groceries. Jake had noticed how Thomas moved slowly and carefully, how he needed help finding things, and most importantly, how much money he seemed to have with him. Jake's criminal mind started working immediately. A blind old man living alone on a farm. It seemed like the perfect target. But Jake wasn't stupid enough to try something like this alone. He knew he needed help, and unfortunately, he knew exactly where to find it. His younger cousin Danny had always looked up to Jake, even when Jake was making terrible decisions. Danny was only 22, had never been in serious trouble before, but he was unemployed and struggling just like Jake. When Jake started talking about easy money, Danny's ears perked up. "Come on, Danny," Jake said one evening when they were sitting in his trailer, drinking cheap beer and complaining about their problems. "This old guy lives by himself out there on that big farm. He's got money. I saw it myself. And he can't even see us coming. It would be so easy." Danny felt uncomfortable about the whole idea, but Jake kept pushing. "Look, we're not gonna hurt the old man or anything. We'll just scare him a little, take whatever cash he's got lying around, maybe grab some of that expensive farm equipment he's got. 20 minutes, and all our money problems are solved." The third person Jake recruited was Tommy Chen, a 19-year-old who had dropped out of high school and spent most of his time getting into minor trouble around town. Tommy was the kind of kid who would do almost anything to feel like he belonged somewhere, even if it meant following Jake into something dangerous. When Jake told him about the plan, Tommy didn't ask many questions. He just wanted to be part of the group. For 2 weeks, the three men started watching Thomas's farm. They would park Jake's old pickup truck on a back road where they could see Thomas's property through binoculars. They learned Thomas's daily routine, noting how every evening around 6 o'clock, he would walk with his big horse to the back pasture to bring in the cattle for the night. "That's when we'll get him," Jake explained to the others. "He'll be way out there in the backfield, far from the house. Nobody will hear anything, and by the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be long gone." What the three men didn't understand was how closely Thunder watched over Thomas during these evening walks. They saw the horse as just another farm animal, something that might make noise but wouldn't really be a problem. Jake had grown up around farms, and in his experience, horses were gentle creatures that ran away from trouble, not toward it. Danny started having second thoughts as the plan became more real. "Jake, what if something goes wrong? What if the old man gets hurt?" "Nothing's gonna go wrong," Jake insisted. "We go in, we get the money, we get out. Simple as that. The old guy probably keeps cash hidden all over that farmhouse. Farmers don't trust banks. Everybody knows that." Tommy was excited about the whole thing, seeing it as some kind of adventure. He had no idea how serious the situation really was, or how badly things could go wrong. In his teenage mind, it seemed like something out of a movie. Sneak onto a farm, grab some money, become rich overnight. As October arrived and the evening started getting darker earlier, Jake decided it was time to act. He had been watching the weather forecast and saw that Tuesday evening was supposed to be foggy. Perfect cover for what they had planned. He called Danny and Tommy and told them to meet him at the usual spot on the back road. "Tonight's the night," Jake announced when the three men gathered near his truck. "Weather's perfect, and I saw the old man's routine hasn't changed. He'll be out there with his horse right around 6:30, just like always." The fog was indeed rolling in thick across the countryside, making everything look mysterious and slightly dangerous. Jake felt like this was a sign that their plan was meant to succeed. He had brought along a couple of baseball bats and some rope, just in case they needed to restrain Thomas while they searched his house for money. "Remember," Jake told the others as they walked through the woods toward Thomas's property, "we stick to the plan. We grab him when he's out in the back field, away from the house. We make him tell us where his money is, we tie him up so he can't follow us or call for help, and then we clean out his house." What Jake didn't mention to Danny and Tommy was that he had no intention of leaving Thomas unharmed. Jake figured a blind witness was still a witness, and he couldn't afford to go back to prison. In his twisted thinking, he believed he might have to do something permanent to make sure Thomas could never identify them. As they crept through the trees surrounding Thomas's farm, the three men could see the familiar sight of Thomas and Thunder making their way toward the back pasture. The big horse was walking slowly and carefully as always, with Thomas's hand resting gently on his neck for guidance. "There they are," Jake whispered, pointing through the fog. "Just like clockwork. Come on, let's circle around and get ahead of them. When they reach that old oak tree, that's where we make our move." Danny's heart was pounding as they moved into position. Part of him wanted to run away, to tell Jake this was a terrible idea, and they should just leave the old man alone. But peer pressure and his own financial desperation kept him moving forward. Tommy was trying to act tough, but his hands were shaking as he gripped the baseball bat Jake had given him. He had never done anything like this before, and the reality of what they were about to do was starting to sink in. None of the three men realized they were about to encounter something they had never seen before. The incredible bond between a man and his horse, and the lengths to which a loyal animal would go to protect someone he loved. Thunder's keen senses had already detected something wrong in the air, something that didn't belong in his peaceful world with Thomas. As Thomas and Thunder approached the old oak tree where the three criminals waited in hiding, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The evening air was thick with fog as Thomas and Thunder made their familiar walk toward the back pasture. Thomas could feel the dampness on his face and knew that the weather was changing. These October evenings in Kentucky could turn cold quickly. and he wanted to make sure all his cattle were safely gathered before nightfall. Thunder's steady footsteps on the worn dirt path were like music to Thomas's ears. After 12 years of walking together, Thomas could tell Thunder's mood just by listening to his gait. Tonight, though, something seemed different. Thunder's steps were slightly more cautious than usual, and Thomas could feel a tension in the big horse's muscles beneath his hand. "What is it, boy?" Thomas asked quietly, running his free hand along Thunder's powerful neck. "You sense something out there?" Thunder's ears were moving constantly, swiveling forward and back as he listened to sounds that Thomas's human ears couldn't detect. The horse had learned over the years that his job was to be Thomas's eyes and ears, to watch for dangers that his human friend couldn't see coming. As they approached the old oak tree that marked the halfway point to the back pasture, Thunder suddenly stopped walking. His whole body went rigid, and Thomas could feel the horse's head lift high as he tested the air with his nostrils. Thunder had detected something that didn't belong in their peaceful evening routine. "Easy, Thunder," Thomas said, though he was starting to feel worried himself. In all their years together, he had learned to trust Thunder's instincts completely. If the horse sensed danger, there probably was danger. That's when Jake Morrison stepped out from behind the oak tree, followed by Danny and Tommy. The three men had been crouched in the shadows waiting for exactly this moment. Jake had a baseball bat in his hands while the other two flanked him on either side. "Well, well, well," Jake said with a nasty smile in his voice. "Look what we have here. Just an old man and his horse all alone out here in the fog." Thomas's heart immediately started racing. He couldn't see the men, but he could hear the threat in Jake's voice. He could also sense that there were multiple people surrounding him and Thunder. His hand instinctively tightened on Thunder's lead rope. "I don't want any trouble," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "If you need help with something, maybe we can work it out." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Oh, we definitely need help with something, old man. We need help with our money problems, and we think you're going to be real helpful with that." Thunder was becoming more agitated by the second. The horse could smell the fear and aggression coming from the three strangers. His nostrils flared as he tried to position himself between Thomas and the threat he sensed approaching. "Look, I don't keep much money on me," Thomas said honestly. "I've got maybe $20 in my wallet. You're welcome to it if that's what you need." "$20? Jake's voice turned angry. "You think we're stupid? A farmer with 40 acres and all this equipment, and you're telling me you only got $20? We know you old-timers don't trust banks. We know you keep cash hidden around here somewhere." Danny was starting to feel sick to his stomach. Seeing Thomas standing there, clearly frightened but trying to stay calm, made Danny realize how wrong this whole thing was. This wasn't some faceless victim. This was a real person. Someone's grandfather. Someone who was just trying to live peacefully on his farm. "Jake, maybe we should just take the 20 and go," Danny whispered. But Jake wasn't interested in $20 anymore. He had convinced himself that Thomas was hiding thousands of dollars somewhere, and he was determined to get it. "Shut up, Danny. We're doing this my way." Tommy was gripping his baseball bat so tightly his knuckles were white. He was trying to look tough, but inside he was terrified. This was his first time doing anything like this, and the whole situation felt like it was spinning out of control. "Here's what's going to happen, old man," Jake said, stepping closer to Thomas. "You're going to tell us where you keep your real money, and then you're going to show us where it is. And if you try to lie to us or cause any problems, things are going to get real unpleasant for you." Thunder's behavior was becoming more and more aggressive. The massive horse was now pawing the ground with his front hoof, a clear warning sign that he was prepared to defend his human companion. Thunder's ears were pinned back against his head, and he was making low, rumbling sounds deep in his chest. "Easy, Thunder," Thomas said, but he could feel that the horse was coiled like a spring, ready to explode into action at any moment. Jake noticed the horse's behavior but wasn't particularly concerned. In his experience, horses were flight animals. When trouble started, they ran away. He figured once things got rough, the horse would bolt, leaving Thomas completely helpless. "Nice horse you got there," Jake said mockingly. "Too bad he can't help you now. Tommy, grab that rope and get ready to tie the old man up once we get him talking." That's when Jake made his first big mistake. He reached out and shoved Thomas hard in the chest, sending the blind farmer stumbling backward. Thomas lost his balance and fell to his knees, his hand losing contact with Thunder's lead rope for the first time in years. The moment Thomas hit the ground, something changed in Thunder. The gentle, patient horse that had spent years carefully guiding his blind companion transformed into something primal and fierce. Thunder's protective instincts, built over millions of years of evolution, exploded to the surface. Thunder reared up on his hind legs with a sound that was part whinny, part roar. His massive front hooves, each one capable of crushing a man's skull, pawed the air just inches from Jake's face. The sight of 1,800 pounds of angry horse rising up like a mountain was terrifying. Jake stumbled backward, suddenly realizing that maybe he had seriously underestimated the situation. But he was too committed to back down now. "Danny, grab that stick and keep the horse back. Tommy, help me get the old man up." Thunder came back down on all four legs but immediately positioned himself directly over Thomas, who was still on the ground trying to get his bearings. The horse's massive body created a protective shield, and his head was low and menacing as he faced the three attackers. "Get away from him," Thunder seemed to be saying with every fiber of his being, though no words were needed. His message was crystal clear. Danny picked up a long branch from the ground and tried to wave it at Thunder, hoping to scare the horse away from Thomas. But Thunder wasn't intimidated. Instead, the horse's eyes locked onto Danny with an intelligence that was almost human-like, as if Thunder was calculating exactly what he needed to do to neutralize each threat. Jake and Tommy managed to grab Thomas by his arms and pull him to his feet, but Thunder immediately moved to stay between them and his human companion. Every time one of the men tried to move Thomas away from the horse, Thunder would block their path with his massive body. "This horse is crazy," Tommy shouted, genuine fear creeping into his voice. But Thunder wasn't crazy. He was doing exactly what his instincts and his love for Thomas were telling him to do. The horse had spent years learning to protect and guide his blind companion, and now those instincts were being pushed to their absolute limit. What happened next would test the incredible bond between man and horse in ways neither of them could have imagined. What happened next would be talked about in the county for years to come. Thunder wasn't just reacting like an ordinary horse anymore. He was thinking, planning, and fighting with an intelligence that seemed almost impossible for an animal to possess. Jake had managed to pull Thomas about 10 feet away from Thunder, thinking he had separated the old man from his protector. But Thunder had other plans. The massive horse didn't charge blindly forward like most animals might. Instead, he seemed to study the situation, looking at each of the three men and figuring out the best way to handle them one by one. "Keep that horse back," Jake yelled to Danny, who was still waving the stick nervously in Thunder's direction. But Danny was discovering that threatening an 1,800-pound horse with a tree branch was like trying to stop a freight train with a fly swatter. Thunder made his first calculated move. Instead of going straight for Jake, who was holding Thomas, Thunder turned his attention to Danny. The horse moved with surprising speed for such a large animal, charging directly at the young man with the stick. Danny tried to swing the branch at Thunder's head, but the horse was too smart for that. Thunder dropped his massive shoulder and slammed into Danny's chest like a linebacker making a tackle. The impact sent Danny flying backward about 15 feet. He hit the ground hard and rolled several times before coming to a stop near the creek that ran along the edge of Thomas's property. Danny wasn't seriously hurt, but he was definitely out of the fight. He lay there gasping for breath, staring up at the foggy sky and wondering how he had gotten himself into this mess.
"Danny!" Tommy shouted, seeing his friend go down. The 19-year-old was starting to panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Horses were supposed to be gentle and scared of people, not throwing grown men around like rag dolls. But Thunder wasn't
finished. With Danny taken care of, the horse turned his attention to Tommy. The teenager was holding a baseball bat, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip it. Thunder approached Tommy slowly, almost like he was giving the young man a chance to make the smart choice and run away. Tommy raised the bat above his head, trying to look threatening. "Stay back," he yelled, though his voice cracked with fear. "I'll hit you if you come any closer." Thunder stopped about 6 feet away from Tommy and did something that would be burned into the teenager's memory forever. The horse tilted his massive head and looked directly into Tommy's eyes. It wasn't the blank stare of a dumb animal. It was the intelligent, knowing look of a creature that understood exactly what was happening and exactly what he needed to do about it. For a moment, Tommy felt like Thunder was trying to communicate with him, trying to tell him that this didn't have to end badly if Tommy would just walk away. But Tommy was too scared and too committed to back down now. He swung the bat at Thunder's head with all the strength he could manage. Thunder saw the swing coming from a mile away. The horse ducked his head with perfect timing, and the bat whistled, harmlessly through the air above him. Before Tommy could recover his balance, Thunder spun around with amazing agility and kicked out with his back legs. His hooves caught Tommy right in the ribs, not hard enough to seriously injure him, but hard enough to send him stumbling backward toward the fence line. Tommy hit the wooden fence with a crash that could be heard across the pasture. Several fence boards cracked from the impact, and Tommy slumped to the ground, clutching his side and gasping for air. Like Danny, he was hurt but not badly injured. Thunder seemed to know exactly how much force to use, enough to stop the threat, but not enough to cause permanent damage. Now it was just Jake and Thunder, with Thomas caught in the middle. Jake was beginning to realize that he had made a terrible mistake. In less than 2 minutes, this horse had taken out both of his accomplices and was now focused entirely on him. But Jake was desperate and desperate, angry people often make very poor decisions. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Jake snarled at Thunder, tightening his grip on Thomas's arm. "Well, let's see how smart you are when I hurt your precious owner." Jake raised his hand to strike Thomas, but he never got the chance. Thunder moved faster than anyone thought possible for such a large animal. The horse grabbed Jake by the back of his jacket with his teeth and simply lifted the man off the ground. For a moment, Jake found himself dangling in the air, held up by the most powerful jaws he had ever encountered. Thunder shook his head once, like a dog shaking a toy, and then released his grip. Jake went flying through the air and landed hard about 20 feet away, rolling several times before coming to a stop in a patch of muddy ground near the water trough. Thomas, now free from Jake's grip, immediately reached out for Thunder. His hands found the horse's strong neck, and he held on tight. "Good boy, Thunder," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "Good boy." But Thunder wasn't ready to celebrate yet. The horse positioned himself directly over Thomas, creating a protective canopy with his large body. Thomas found himself sitting on the ground between Thunder's 4 legs, completely surrounded by the horse's protective presence. Thunder kept his head low and moving, watching all 3 of the attackers to make sure none of them tried to get up and cause more trouble. The horse's ears were still pinned back, and his eyes had a fierce look that made it clear he was ready for round 2 if anyone wanted to try their luck again. Jake struggled to his feet, covered in mud and completely furious. He had never been so humiliated in his life. "This isn't over," he shouted at Thomas and Thunder. "I'll be back, and next time I'll be ready for your stupid horse." But even as Jake made his threats, he was backing away from Thunder. The horse took a few steps in Jake's direction, and that was enough to send Jake scrambling toward the woods where they had hidden earlier. Danny had managed to get to his feet and was limping toward the trees, holding his chest where Thunder had hit him. Tommy was still sitting by the broken fence, looking dazed and confused. When he saw Jake retreating, Tommy struggled to his feet and followed, though he kept looking back at Thunder with a mixture of fear and amazement. Thunder watched the 3 men disappear into the woods, but he didn't relax his guard. The horse continued to stand over Thomas, alert and ready, his powerful body trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the fight. For the next 20 minutes, Thunder maintained his protective position, occasionally letting out a loud whinny that echoed across the fields like a warning to anyone else who might be thinking about causing trouble. Thomas sat quietly beneath his protector, running his hands along Thunder's legs and speaking softly to calm the horse down. He was amazed by what had just happened, but not entirely surprised. He had always known Thunder was special, but tonight the horse had shown a level of intelligence and loyalty that went beyond anything Thomas had ever imagined possible. "You saved my life, boy," Thomas said quietly, his voice full of gratitude and love. I don't know what I ever did to deserve a friend like you. Thunder gradually began to relax, but he never stopped watching the tree line where the attackers had disappeared. The horse had won this battle, but his protective instincts told him to stay alert until help arrived. 25 minutes had passed since the three attackers had disappeared into the woods, and Thunder was still standing guard over Thomas like a faithful sentinel. The big horse's ears continued to move back and forth, listening for any sound that might signal the return of danger. Thomas could feel Thunder's muscles still tense beneath his hands, ready to spring into action again if needed. That's when they both heard the sound of a truck engine coming up the long gravel driveway. Thunder's head shot up, and Thomas felt his heart start racing again. Were the attackers coming back with more people? But then Thomas heard a familiar voice calling out through the fog. Thomas, are you out there? I heard some commotion from my place. It was Bill Henderson, Thomas's neighbor who lived about half a mile down the road. Bill was a retired sheriff who had moved to the country 5 years ago to enjoy his golden years in peace. At 62 years old, Bill still had the sharp instincts of a law enforcement officer, and he had heard Thunder's warning whinnies carrying across the quiet countryside. Over here, Bill, Thomas called out, his voice hoarse with relief. By the old oak tree. Thunder remained protective but began to relax slightly as he recognized Bill's scent and voice. Bill Henderson had visited the farm many times over the years and had always been kind to both Thomas and Thunder. The horse knew Bill was a friend. Bill came walking quickly through the fog, carrying a powerful flashlight and his old service pistol. When he saw Thomas sitting on the ground between Thunder's legs, with the horse standing over him like a guardian angel, Bill knew immediately that something serious had happened. Thomas, what in the world happened here? Bill asked, kneeling down beside his friend while keeping a respectful distance from Thunder, who was still on high alert. Thomas quickly explained about the 3 men who had attacked him and how Thunder had fought them off. As Thomas told the story, Bill's expression grew more and more amazed. He had been around horses his whole life, but he had never heard of anything like what Thomas was describing. You're telling me Thunder took on 3 men by himself and sent them all running? Bill asked, looking up at the massive horse with new respect. Bill, I've never seen anything like it, Thomas said, his voice still shaking from the experience. It was like Thunder knew exactly what to do. He didn't just react. He planned it out, took them down one by one. Bill immediately called the sheriff's department on his cell phone. Within 30 minutes, 2 patrol cars and an ambulance arrived at the farm. The paramedics checked Thomas for injuries and found only minor cuts and bruises. Thunder, meanwhile, had finally relaxed enough to allow the officers to approach, though he stayed close to Thomas's side the entire time. Deputy Rodriguez, who had been with the sheriff's department for 15 years, took Thomas's statement, while Deputy Williams examined the scene. The evidence of the fight was clear: broken fence boards where Tommy had hit the fence, deep hoof prints in the mud where Thunder had charged the attackers, and the stick that Danny had dropped when Thunder knocked him down. Mr. Mitchell, Deputy Rodriguez said, based on your description and what we're seeing here, this horse probably saved your life tonight. Those men could have seriously hurt you if Thunder hadn't intervened. What Thomas didn't know was that Jake, Danny, and Tommy hadn't gotten very far after fleeing the farm. Jake's truck had broken down about 2 miles away, and in their panicked state they had made the mistake of trying to hitchhike back to town. A state trooper had picked them up, and when he noticed that all 3 men were muddy, disheveled, and acting nervous, he had called for backup. By the time the sun came up the next morning, all 3 attackers were in custody. Jake was charged with assault, attempted robbery, and conspiracy. Danny and Tommy, who had no prior criminal records, were charged with lesser offenses, but were still facing serious jail time. During their questioning, all 3 men kept talking about the horse that had single-handedly defeated them. That wasn't no normal horse, Jake told the detective interviewing him. That thing was like something out of a movie. It knew exactly what it was doing. Word about Thunder's heroic actions spread quickly through the small county. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon reporters were calling Thomas asking for interviews. At first, Thomas was reluctant to talk to the media. He had always been a private person, and the idea of being in the spotlight made him uncomfortable. But Bill Henderson convinced him that sharing Thunder's story might help other people understand how special the bond between humans and animals could be. Thomas, Bill said, this story gives people hope. In a world where we hear so much bad news, people need to hear about the good things too. The first news crew arrived at the farm 3 days after the attack. The reporter, a young woman named Lisa Chang from the regional television station, was expecting to do a simple human interest story about a horse that had protected its owner. But when she met Thomas and Thunder and heard the full story, she realized this was something much more significant. The bond between Thomas and Thunder is unlike anything I've ever seen, Lisa reported on the evening news. This isn't just a story about a horse protecting its owner. This is a story about love, loyalty, and the incredible intelligence of animals that we often underestimate. The television story caught the attention of animal welfare organizations across the country. The American Humane Association sent representatives to visit Thomas and Thunder, wanting to verify the details of what had happened. After interviewing Thomas, Bill Henderson, and the responding officers, they determined that Thunder's actions were indeed extraordinary. Dr. Patricia Williams, an animal behavior specialist from the State University, spent a full day at the farm, studying Thunder's behavior and his relationship with Thomas. What I'm seeing here challenges everything we think we know about equine intelligence, Dr. Williams explained to Thomas. Thunder's actions show problem-solving abilities and emotional intelligence that are typically associated with much more advanced species. 3 months after the attack, the American Humane Association made an unprecedented decision. They announced that Thunder would be the first horse ever to receive their Hero Award, which had previously been given only to dogs and cats. The ceremony was held right there on Thomas's farm, with hundreds of people attending. During the ceremony, Thomas gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes. 12 years ago, I lost my sight and thought my life was over, he said, his hand resting on Thunder's neck. But Thunder taught me that sometimes when you lose one thing, you gain something even more precious. He gave me back my independence, my purpose, and most importantly, he showed me what true friendship looks like. Thunder, wearing a special halter made just for the occasion, stood quietly beside Thomas throughout the ceremony. The big horse seemed to understand that this was an important day, though he was probably more interested in the carrots and apples that visitors kept offering him. After the ceremony, Thomas was approached by several organizations wanting to use Thunder's story to promote animal welfare and disability awareness. Thomas agreed to share their story, but only on the condition that any money raised would go toward helping other disabled farmers and supporting horse rescue organizations. Today, 5 years after that foggy October evening, Thomas and Thunder continue their daily routine on the farm. The back pasture where the attack took place looks the same as always, except for a small plaque that Bill Henderson had installed near the old oak tree. It reads, "In this spot, Thunder the horse showed the world what love and loyalty truly mean." Thomas often brings visitors to that spot and tells them Thunder's story. People ask me all the time if I think Thunder knew he was being a hero that night, Thomas says. I tell them that Thunder wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just being a friend. And sometimes that's the most heroic thing of all.